All right, welcome back. It's Art with Mr. Anderson, Art with Anderson, and we're live here. And today I have something special for you, and we're going to dive right in. But before I get started, there's a couple ways to do this, but I want to start off with what this theory really is. Like, I'm going to be teaching you guys a concept called value mapping. And a value map is simply what a photograph already is, or a drawing. And we talked about value in some of our past videos, and I'm just going to say it right now. It's basically light, dark, and everything in between. So it could be black and white, and we'll be using that for these examples today. But you could also have color being light versus dark. I mean, picture like a yellow. A yellow is always going to be a lighter value than, say, like a blue, okay? Especially if you want to make a dark yellow, it's probably going to end up more brown and so on. So for example, you could make a light blue, but even that light blue is typically going to be darker than something like a yellow. Let's not get distracted by that. And I just want to talk about my setup for today. I'm going to be demonstrating using my iPad, using this app called Procreate. I'm using an Apple Pencil, but if you have some type of tablet or even your phone, Procreate is only available on Apple products right now, but there's also some really good apps called another one is called Sketchbook. It's put out by Autodesk, and that is free, and you can access that on a Windows computer, an Android, or Apple products. But I just want to dive right in here, and the title of this video is a little bit strange, but it's called Shadow Hunter. Okay, so think of this as a game. Take some slack off of your expectations here, but ironically, we're going to simplify the process of drawing realistically. And we're going to dive in. I see that a bunch of people are joining us today. Kate, Jim, Rick, let's see, Carol, Joe. Thanks for joining today. We're going to get started right away. So what do I have here? I pulled this picture of JFK offline. And what I want you guys to start looking at is, don't see a face. I want you to see light and dark. Think of it as a map. Like, we're going to try to find like different states on a map. We're going to hunt for the shadow dark areas first, and we're going to create borders for them. So I have a red kind of brush selected, and I'm looking for the darkest areas. You can see them. Forget that you're drawing a chin. I just want you to focus on mapping out these faces. So how can you do this if you don't have a tablet? Well, if you find any picture in like a magazine or something like that, you can go over it with a pen, and we're just mapping out the shapes that kind of make up a drawing. Now that's a little bit thick here. Let me just adjust my thickness. All right, so instead of tracing like a cartoon, I'm tracing where the light changes. So I'm being careful to get the shape exactly of where each thing is. So for example, if I zoom into the lips here, I can get really close and see that there's this dark patch here, a little bit lighter there. So I'm just going to do the darkest of darks. Same thing with the lip. You can see that there's one shadow, it's a little bit lighter, that follows the shape of the lips. But instead of finishing that line over where you would normally draw it if you were drawing like a cartoon, I'm going to go over here. You can see how the shadow changes shapes over here. Now, what we're learning today is how to see like an artist, okay? Seeing the reality that's around us in a little bit different way. Instead of thinking about what we're seeing, like who it is or what it is, we're seeing how the light hits the object. And that's exactly what a photograph does. It records light and dark. That's about it. So let's dive back in. Look at the shadow that's hidden inside of the lip there, okay? So this is what I call shadow hunting. I'm looking for the darkest darks in here. And the darkest darks form what we'd normally think about in a cartoon as, you know, the shapes themselves. Like the nose isn't really a shape that we could easily outline. We can show like these dark darks are shadows. It's because the nose is sticking out that we can see some of those changes from light to dark. So you might be wondering, okay, if this is going to be the way we're doing this, what are some ways I can do this on paper? Well, first of all, you can certainly print out a piece of paper and then trace that stuff out. You could do it with tracing paper if you have a light box, but the reason I wanted to show you here is just to get right into the meat of it. And I'll be sharing some links down at the bottom of the video. If you want to check those out, they are going to be some free websites that will allow you to do some little cheat codes that I have for you. And we're just looking over here to see what we got. All right, so notice how I'm looking for those darkest darks. And they might seem familiar, but it's important not to imagine anything. We're literally just pretending like this is a map where we're trying to locate the darkest little states and create borders for them. So even those wrinkles are going to be shapes like that. Now, what's crazy about this is you can start to see how this is going to look a little bit different. And I want to show you the difference between if I were to do this on paper or versus a computer or a tablet. Now, what's great about using a tablet, especially or your phone, is that you can separate out different drawings on different layers. So I kind of made the mistake of putting this on the same layer, but I'm going to back up real quick and I'll show you a really easy way if you're using something like a phone to do this. So I'm going to create a second layer on top, and that way if I draw anything over here, I can actually turn off the picture. So our goal for today is to create a coloring book that is special to the picture that we're tracing today, and then we're going to be able to fill it in using darks, grays, and lights in order to create a realistic face. So follow along with me as I do that. If you don't have the setup today, I'm going to try to go over the process in the first part of the video. And maybe if you want to try this stuff, you could try it at home because it will be a little bit more complex. Maybe you want to pick the actual, picture you're going to do. So let's see how quickly we can do that. All right. So I'm going to dive back in. I like to zoom in and try to get as many of these things as possible. And I'm moving quickly for the sake of this video. And we don't want to get distracted with too much detail. We're just trying to get general shapes in. And I'm just picking the generally dark areas. I'm not getting too focused on like the dark stuff. I'm just making some shapes, and we'll see if we can get this thing to look as realistic as possible in the shortest amount of time. So I'm getting those dark chunks on the side of the nose there. Notice there's this shape just about here. The eyebrows, remember, it's like a ridge that goes above. It's a bony ridge that protects our eyes. The eye, eyelid, and then the pupil. I'm just going to throw that all into one. But my favorite part of the eye is this little highlight there. I'm going to zoom in so you can see it. That little island of white, that's going to be called a highlight. Okay, so we're focusing on shadow hunting right now, but we also want to pay attention to all of the details, all the details that might be hidden in the picture. So when I finish up a good amount of these details, you're going to see when we turn off the photo layer, you'll be able to see we just created an awesome little coloring book on how to draw JFK's face. And why do I say this? It's basically, if you've ever done a paint by number, that's what we're creating. We're just going to look for a few more. There's usually one hiding over here by the corner of the nose. Let's put this one in there too. We see a little bit over on that crease where the mouth portion meets the cheek. We have a little shadow on the side of the face. And you don't have to close all of the shapes, but do enough just to get in here. But the difference between tracing like a cartoon that has a clear outline and something that has shades of value is that we have to be careful to try to hunt out some of the light points, the gray points, and the dark ones. So here we go. I have another shadow down here by the chin. And I'm going to kind of outline some of the highlights or the light areas, which will give some shape to the form. Just trying to generalize. Don't freak out over details right now. Just get the darkest areas and the lightest areas drawn in. Just make sure we got this on a separate layer. Let's give ourselves a preview. Notice how this line work is actually floating separately. That's going to give us a really simplified version of this that we can start shading in later. Let me finish it up with a few more details. I'm going to try to get the outline of the head. But instead of focusing on the outline, I'm looking now, okay, there's a really dark area here in the hair. That's the shadow side, which would mean the light is coming from the opposite side over here. I see another shadow right here in the hair. And you'll notice that these shapes of shadows, okay, if you're shadow hunting, aren't always the shape of like the actual object you're drawing. So we have a shadow here. It's almost like a triangle. Here's the edge of the hair. We see this little slice of shadow in his ear, and then the ear hole. And let's back up. You can just put a few lines in there. That shadow on the wrinkle in his forehead. Some of these here. And then around his eye. Let's do a few of those. Okay, so I'm not only shadow hunting, I'm looking for bright spaces in between and highlighting those. We'll get a few more on his neck right here. Here's a clear, sharp shape right here. That would be his shirt and then his collar of his jacket. But don't miss out. Look, there's a really light edge here, and then it gets dark. So I'm going to draw the dark area, kind of swoops through, and then there's a line. This is light. This is kind of dark, right? All right, let's see how that looks. All right, now we have a simplified version of JFK's face, and that's where we wanted to get to, because what we're trying to do as artists is break down complex things that have a lot of details down into the simplest version of them, and then only after that is when we can add any details that we really want to do. So what I'm going to focus on right now, just so you can get this idea really quickly, is I'm going to start shading in or coloring in this coloring book on the iPad, so you can just believe that this is a technique that works. Okay, so we're 15 minutes in, and we have technically a pretty accurate portrait of a pretty famous person you could recognize. And let's see if we can get it even more believable. So I'm actually going to create a separate layer for this. I'm going to put it underneath my lines so we can still see them. And I'm going to turn this photo back on, all right? But just to help me know what are the darkest areas, all right? So I'm going to go in with a black coloring area. Let's see if I can just do this real quick. All right, and I'm just going to try to generally color in these areas the best I can. I'll have to go back in with detail. So that's definitely a big shadow. Let's put some in right here. I know there's going to be some on this side of the head. I'll go back in with a smaller brush. A little bit. That's dark. Okay, and then I'm going to zoom in and then put some in right here. Really fill that stuff in that I know that's going to be dark. This is definitely going to be a simplified version of his face because we're just hunting for the darkest dark areas. But you'll be surprised with how recognizable, even when I'm drawing this quickly or sloppy with a big brush here, how quickly that's going to turn out to look a lot like JFK. So I'm just being careful to only put the darkest darks in there for now. Again, if this is freaking you out how fast I'm drawing, again, I'm doing this for your purposes so we can get through as much material today. And I'm going to say this is a little bit advanced, so if you're intimidated by it, just feel free to watch and kind of see if you can absorb something. Maybe you'll get an idea from it that you can use later, or you see, even a year or two from now, you see something interesting and you're like, oh, that's how they did that. That's going to be the beauty of exposing yourself to this type of process. And the next time some artist is like, oh, wow, I drew this really realistic thing by hand, you'll be able to say, oh, did you use a value map or did you trace your values out beforehand? And they'll look at you like, don't tell anyone. Everyone thinks that I do this completely without looking. So if any artist tells you that they don't trace, they're lying. I'm going to be honest with you. Maybe there's a few if they do it right in front of you. But all right, let's take a look. See if we got an image that's going here. Do you start to see that? I think we forgot to fill in his eyeball. Let me do that real quick. So see how I left that little white spot? That's going to be really cool because when we turn this off, okay, we still have our red lines, but if we zoom out, you can start to see, wow, that really looks like JFK, and we just did that with black shapes, right? We didn't draw any individual strands of hair. We didn't draw the eyeballs. We have these weird shapes. And we're 19 minutes into this video, and I talked for about 3. So that's 15 minutes, and we're already to a almost photorealistic, pretty recognizable picture. So if you're thinking about like, oh man, I have to memorize all these proportions, you can actually skip ahead with this different technique and be like, boom, this is a totally different approach that most artists will use instead of painstakingly drawing every detail. Because the fact is, think of a dark room. If you're in a dark room and you need to see something on the far wall and the lights are off, you're not going to be able to see that detail. If I had to draw that, could I even draw the detail in the dark room? No, I would just draw black, right? Because you can't see that detail. So every single black area on here just saved us a ton of time and did most of the work for us. So these shadow hunting techniques I'm showing you and making a map of where they are, where they live, is literally 80% of your job as an artist. So I'm hoping this is, making some light bulbs go off. But let's take it another level. I'm going to turn my photo back on. And if you notice, next to our dark areas, you see that there's some kind of gray areas, and we did outline them. So this area is about protecting your whites, okay? And then we're going to fill in the other areas with what we call a mid-tone. Okay, so it's not quite a shadow. It's just more like places that aren't super bright. So I'm actually going to try to find a gray. And what's cool if you work on a computer is you can sample the color. Literally, see how this little thing pops up? It'll take whatever color I get and load it in. So I'm going to take like this kind of gray area here. And if I color in, I'll add a separate layer. I'll put it underneath this one. And I'm just going to start coloring in just some of the other areas that weren't affected by the black. Okay. So this is a really helpful way to just add another layer of detail that you otherwise would not have had, or maybe not even noticed before. Make this a little bigger so it goes faster. Okay. So I'm looking at the grays that match that level. And if I was doing this in my studio where I was doing this for a commission, I'd certainly be doing this slower and like really moving carefully. But that's the beauty of another nice thing about doing this on a computer is you have the undo button. So anywhere I see that nice gray area, I'm tracing that in. I'm also noticing, let's take a look at it so far. Starting to look, if you can see, it doesn't look super good yet. Let me try putting it back up there. I notice there's a darker gray. I'm actually going to sample that one and fill in some of those darker areas. Those are usually heading up against the black, right? So if I see a darker shadow area, I'm putting it in. There might be a little bit of a dark shadow here, there. But especially, a lot of people think like, okay, it's my job as an artist to draw super realistically. Well, you might be surprised to learn that, sometimes people actually like art that's a little bit less detailed. like I've talked about in some of my other videos, it's more about getting some things that will really impress people with how their mind puts together some of the blank spots. And here's some more gray that I can put in, and some over here. Let's take a look at how we're looking when we take the picture off. Okay, I'm going to turn off my little red lines there. So what's crazy, all right, we're at 24 minutes, about 20 minutes of drawing. If I zoom out, you can really recognize JFK there. Okay, so not only have we taken what we've learned about light versus dark, or what we call value, but we've also used a technique to actually hunt for those shadows, and the shape of the shadows are what made this look perfect, right? So our proportions are already taken care of. You're not worried about like, oh, what is this? How do I change his eyes? We're using what the photograph did for us to organize light versus dark. Okay. So let me zoom back in here. You can see some of those areas that are light are still light, and it's a pretty general portrait, but like even though we haven't drawn his nose very well, you start to see where it is, right? We have the shadow on this side, and this is what we could call like an abstract portrait. Okay. So if you're kind of confused by using a digital part, I want to show you another way to do this if you're just using paper, because sometimes you don't have tracing paper. You might be able to pull up a picture on the internet, but focusing and finding all the gray and dark areas there can be really frustrating. So I'm going to go through a process that I use to simplify your pictures so you're not starting off shadow hunting in this really complex space. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull out, and if you want to do the same thing, we're going to go to the YouTube video, and in the comment section, okay, there's a site down here. It says links from the video, posterize your photo. And if I pull up this site, there's a really cool thing that if you upload a photo, it'll simplify it into a different, like a black and white, where it just cuts out some of the detail, right? So if this was the original photo, where it's all the colors, everything else, you can pull it up to an area where it simplifies some of those shapes for you. It created a value map that made it simpler, almost like a coloring book, right? So we're going to try that same thing, and we'll do that with the photo that we just had. So what I'm going to do is go back to Procreate. I'm going to turn off all of our drawing layers and turn back on this picture here. Then I'm going to just put it in my photo library so I can, let's see, share it as a JPEG. And we will save the image. All right. Now I'm going to go back to the website, and I'm going to go down here. Hopefully you guys can see this. Let me get this a little lower for you guys so you can check it out. Okay. So I'm going to choose my file from my photo library. It's right here. I'm just going to put a medium size. Okay. Uh-oh. All right, there we go. Now we're going to pick the level of posterization. I don't know if you can see this. Let me zoom in. So what this means is, think of all the numbers of gray in between black and white. We're going to simplify it from like an infinite amount, right? All these smooth gray areas. And we're going to simplify it. And we're just going to say 4. Okay. And then pre-make black and white picture. To go black and white, I'm going to turn this off. And I'm just going to say standard JPEG quality. That just means the file type. I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to open up my processed image. All right. So do you see how this simplified it into those shapes already? That's going to help you a ton. But you would notice that some of those really bright areas were removed. Well, that's okay, but it's essentially what we did by hand by tracing those things out. But the reason I'm doing this right now is to actually help you guys if you wanted to create a perfect match on your piece of paper without tracing. I'm not going to be able to finish this whole thing, but I'll be able to give you the template to follow if you're really struggling to make this happen with your equipment. So at least if you have a computer, the next step I'm going to do here is I'm going to save this photo. So you could do this on your desktop computer as well. All right, I'm going to save the image just so I have it on my computer. All right, now I'm going to go back to the YouTube video, and there's another link on there. The second one, it says grid your photo. And this is what I really enjoy because it's actually a very old technique. All right, I'm going to this site. It's called griddrawingtool.com. And you'll notice there's a tutorial here if you need help with it. But I'm going to skip to step 1, and I'm going to upload that photo that I just created. So I'm going to go back to my photo library. And there it is, my recent photo. I'm selecting that. It's uploading now. So I have my picture here, right? I'm going to hit next here. And that's going to help me if I need to rotate it. It's all set for me. And I started off with a square picture. That's another tip I've found that makes this easy. Next. I don't need to crop it because I feel like I already have it set up. I'll hit next. And this is editing. No, so I hit next. All right, here we go. Now notice this divides it into a nice little grid here. 6 by 6 is pretty good. You don't want to get really fine. So what I'm going to do is apply the grid and download it. So what I have now is this picture that is divided up into squares. I'm going to show you how to put this and trace it onto your piece of paper. And literally, you're not tracing anymore. You're learning how to draw from observation, but we're breaking it down into little squares, okay? So I just downloaded that. I think I just have to save it one more time. Let's see if it showed up in my photos. Oh, not quite. Well, I don't know what happened there, but I do have to download this picture somehow. Anyway, why don't we do this? I'm going to flip my iPad around and get set up so I can see this on my iPad, or you could use your computer screen. I'm going to zoom out on my camera here so you can start to see my drawing, because I'm going to do a little bit of setup here. So if you have a ruler, this is a little bit essential. I'm going to put this aside for a moment, and we're going to create a grid on this piece of paper that matches it. Okay. So again, I hope you guys are following along. There's a lot of information, but what I love about video and what I use for several years in my classroom is video. You can pause, rewind, replay. That's the beauty of this stuff. I just want to get it out there so you guys have access to as much information as possible. And you guys are real pros for sticking with me on this. All right, here we go. So we're going to set up a grid, and I'm going to draw it in pencil to start. Okay. So I like to put, since we did 6 by 6 grid on this thing, however many squares you do on this, if you start with a square, this is going to be much easier. So I'm going to start with a line down here and make it 6 inches long. So there's 6 inches. And I want to make sure this is a perfect square. So I'm going to try to draw it as even as possible. Okay, and while I'm down here, I'm going to mark at each inch a little tick mark there. This will save you some time. I drew a line like this. Same thing here. I'm going to draw that straight up. Oh, we got to put my 6-inch marks, or sorry, yeah, there we go. I'll line that up. And if you feel like this is a little bit too involved, if you have questions on this or clarifying, I'd be happy to answer them in the comments or on air here. And then I just have another one here. Look, straight line across, and I'm going to end up with a square that's going to be divided up into little squares. Forgot to add my tick marks here. We'll do that, and then we'll connect them using the ruler. All right, so this is kind of the fun part. I line up both tick marks on each side. I just slice right across. So while I'm doing this, I want to talk to you guys about why we're taking the time to do this. Just like it made a lot of that drawing earlier, we were able to create a recognizable likeness to JFK in about 20 minutes, right? That's fast. Wasn't the most detailed, but the craziest part is that anybody would be able to recognize JFK based on that kind of sloppy, quick drawing we did, okay? And if you ever thought it was possible to draw like a likeness, a recognizable picture of somebody in about 15, 20 minutes, when I first learned this, I was blown away too. So what I'm teaching you here is what's called a transfer technique. How do you get the details you might have worked hard to do in a photo onto a piece of paper if you don't have a printer, especially? Okay? Because that's part of the reason I didn't have one printed out for you guys. I don't have a printer with ink in it. It's kind of annoying, right? So check this out. We got 6 squares here, 6 squares down, and this is going to be where we're going to be drawing our JFK. All right, so check this out. If you've ever played Battleship, okay, you know that it works on a grid system. Okay, this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, so the beauty of this grid system is I have the same amount of grid squares right over here, right? 6 across and 6 down. Actually, I have 5. I can't believe I counted wrong. So we'll just cross out this area. We're not going to use these squares. It's 5 by 5. I don't know what I was thinking, guys. Sorry. I'm moving quick here. This coffee's not helping enough, I guess. All right, here we go. So forget 6 and F there, right? So this is our new square. And we're going to start by locating the outline, all right? So picture right here, we're going to focus on this square. Is there any information we need to see? It's basically all gray, and I'm shadow hunting, but I'm not going to trace on the screen. I'm just going to draw this line where it meets that line up there, okay? So you see how it kind of squiggles? Let's try to do that in A1. Okay, so I'm just slicing off the corner here, and there's a little bit of change there, and there's a little bit of like hair that sticks out. Oh, you can hardly see this. I'm sorry. I'm going to turn off my little screen so you don't have to pay attention to me. Let me see. Window capture. Okay, we need that screen space. All right. So we're looking at this corner up here, this square, and I noticed, see how there's like a line here, but I'm looking at the light versus dark instead of just the outline of the head. Okay, now I'm going to move down to A2, which is this next square. Zoom in. See how there's like this dark shape? We're going to try to draw where that meets. So how do I figure out where it is? In this square, about halfway is here. This line starts a little bit past there. So I'm just going to make a mark about halfway down. And then I notice that it's just like this kind of arching shape over here. And then it kind of just goes in like that. Okay. And it continues down into that next square a little bit, about halfway. And then we see this gray part that goes through like this. So what am I doing? I'm using the grid as a way to transfer and make sure I know exactly how long the lines are. So I'm working my way down to the ear. I notice the ear starts in that box right here. It's a little blip. It goes down through the corner of this box and over here. So if you like puzzles, Sudoku, stuff like that, this is a really great way to apply essentially like a math game to something that is totally artistic. So, you know, if you play Battleship and you think like, oh yeah, I strike at A4, you're going to hit the ear. That's the beauty of this. And the awesome part about this is we made 1-inch squares, but what if you had to paint this on the side of like a billboard or a building? You could make your squares much bigger and blow up this picture, make it huge if you wanted to. So the key thing and the idea behind this is focusing on just filling out like one row at a time and focus if there's any detail that you need to see. And you break it up into smaller pieces so you don't have to get freaked out. All right, I'm all the way down at 5 here. And I noticed these like weird kind of gray areas. I'll outline that shape. And then down here. All right, I'm going to start in my B column here. Start back up at the hair. We have this line that goes through a little bit. And then I notice there's just kind of this zigzag hair shape, but it's about halfway up. And I'm going to simplify more. And then there's some dark areas in this corner. Let's go down one more. Let's look at his hairline. Let's see where it hits. So this part of the hairline goes about halfway up the square. So I'll make a mark. We already kind of drew it out starting from here. There's the hair, that dark shape. And then this line follows up. It got like a little zigzag in the middle and down and give it a curve. Let's move down. There's no more detail here. And this is where we get to the eye. Now with the eye, it gets a little bit trickier because we all freak out a little bit, but don't let it intimidate you. We're going to dive right in. And I noticed that the eye hits just below here, right? It's not halfway. The bottom part of the eye is about halfway here. The other part is about 1/4 of the way down. So I'll mark this, and I'll just try to get this shape in. It's kind of at an angle, but it stops before it hits the wall of this square. So it's about right here. So I just try to make that shape the best I can. And there's a little bit of an angle here. Okay. Now this shape in here is a little bit more difficult, right? Because it shows like where that eye is going to be. But I'll try to float it in there. But it's going to be much closer than if we just eyeballed it. No pun intended. Hopefully you guys are enjoying yourselves out there. If you have questions, again, this is a ton of information. I'm moving way fast, but I want to get it to you so you can get started. And we'll see if we can get close to a finished drawing. So I'm scooting down again. I see part of that shadow from the ear. I'm just going to generalize that shape. And then it kind of scoots across like this. Okay, that bottom part. And it continues into this area. This bottom square. It scoops down and goes back up a little bit before exiting. And this is going to be part of the chin, I think. So we've already completed 2 rows of this. We got 3 more to go. It's going pretty quick here. Let's go to the top again. All right, here we go. In the top. Well, we forgot to do this little part here, but it leads into this highlight in the hair. It's a little wavy, and it goes out on the top half here. I'll even finish this out on this side. So as you go, you can get a little more confident with it. All right, here's this darker gray shape. It goes across and leaves close to the corner right here. We're going to move down to C2, okay? And this line is just going to connect from there down to the one we already had. So that's the top of where the hair meets the forehead. And then I'm going to go down. It looks like this little shadow or the wrinkle in his forehead is a little bit, it's basically halfway. So I'm just going to put a little triangle there. Another one like this. And the top of his eye starts in the middle of this grid square. Right? And then it's a little arch. So we'll put that in there from the middle. Kind of trims off there. But then we notice that there's a little point like that, and it goes down across. This is part of his nose, right? So let's look at this nose shape. goes all the way across. The shadow goes almost to the corner. So I'm going to draw a line that goes to the corner of this grid, kind of curved, and I'm just going to make that a little bit wider. But the top of his nose comes in here. It goes almost to this corner. So I'm going to start at the corner, go up a little bit, across, and over. And then I see this nostril, that dark shape. Let me move that up so you can see it. Okay, see that dark nostril? Zoom out to see where it is in the square. Okay, it's just right in the middle. So I'll put that nostril right here. Looks bigger than the other one, which is kind of odd, right? But this other one is pretty small in comparison, but it kind of has a distinct shape. Let's put it over there. We didn't really focus on this eye yet, so I'm going back up to the right corner. Remember we started this shape up here? Let's zoom in here. It comes in a little bit, and that's the top arch of that eye. And then we can see that pupil shape. All right. I'm making decisions to simplify some of this stuff, but I'm going to use this to shade later. But again, we're not focusing on seeing JFK as a face. We're focusing on just transferring the details that we see. We're still shadow hunting. What is the shape of the shadow? Say that 10 times fast, right? Shape of the shadow, shape of the shadow, shape of the shadow. The hardest thing about this is trusting the process. A lot of people, like right now, it looks like, oh, JFK has a pig nose. Well, that's kind of just goes with life, you know. All right, here we go. We got this nose shape. Moving down, here's the mouth. Let's see where it hits on the right side. It's about right midway. Here's that mouth shape. It goes down a little bit to, it's not halfway, it's not at the bottom, it's about a quarter away from the bottom. And it goes a little bit into this square, but I'm just going to draw a shape. And if you're watching, like, just underneath this nose area, we're going to put that little Cupid's bow, which is that little divot in the lip, and go across. But then at the bottom, see how it's almost like that, you still see that relaxed seagull shape that I showed you, I think it was in the superhero video. So that's a nice little shadow. And then this shadow is below his lower lip. Let's draw that in. Goes out a little bit to the left of center here and goes a little bit lower and then back up into this corner. I don't know about you, but it looks like we can start recognizing JFK again. We're only 45 minutes in. We've done JFK almost twice here in 1 hour. That's pretty good. All right. Let's dive down. This is our bottom square. Let's continue where we picked up on this line. This is his chin. It goes across and leaves close to the corner, and I can see that it rounds out and almost completes that shape there. Okay, 2 more rows to go, guys. Hopefully, there's not much in that final row, so I think we're almost finished. Let's go to the top. This is going to be D1. Okay, here's the side of his kind of pompadour shape. To the left of center, I'm giving a parentheses shape. And this little corner here is just below halfway, right? And it's about over here. And it's just going to go out and leave just about right here. So a good way to focus on getting good at this is, where does the line meet the walls? Is it halfway or left of halfway? Make little marks, and that way you can stay on track. Okay, there's a little bit of dark hair shape in there. I'm not going to do it super accurate, but sketched in a little bit of stuff. Let's scoot down. Next square. We have this little wrinkle left over from that C column. That's going to draw a line in and just kind of arch over. And you can see, like, that's kind of the edge of his head. There's some shadow shapes in here. I don't want to get too jumpy here, so let's figure it out. This starts about halfway, and then it ends about halfway through this square. Let's mark it, and let's draw that curve. Over here, we have the same thing. That's you might be surprised. Sometimes you're willing to make, like, you would think the line goes somewhere, but if you check and double check, you might figure out that you're kind of messing it up a little bit. Okay, we're almost there, guys. Here's the eye. Let's look at where it hits the line right here. It definitely goes down, right, from where it hits, and it goes down to the corner. Let me zoom in so you can see this difference between the colors there. It's just below here where it hits, and then it goes down. So let's just draw here. Let me zoom out a little bit. But overall, this is kind of like a triangle shape. A wrinkle in the corner of the eye, it goes over. And here's the bottom of the eye. We see this little cheekbone shadow here. It's more of a triangle in the middle of that square on the right side, or sorry, on the bottom. And then this line continues through, kind of cuts a path down to the corner. All right, we are almost done. Okay, this cheekbone shadow here kind of cuts across diagonal, meets about halfway, and then cuts down. This is going to be his other jaw, right? You can see that shape just kind of swoop down to the final corner of that shape. And that's where his shirt collar goes. Goes about midway down. It's a little like kind of triangular shape. Now there is a little bit of dark shadow in there, those little speckles. I'm going to try to just show where they would be. Kind of a general group of them. And then let's look at this cheek shadow more. It goes to the right and down. You can kind of see it gets lighter around the corner of the mouth. And we didn't really pay too much attention to this shape. That little corner of the nose down into that little crease there that shows the difference between where your mouth area meets the cheek. Okay, and we're going to do our final column. There's not much out here, but I'm going to definitely use it to draw my ear. So I'm just going to, instead of drawing all these shadows up here, I'm going to focus specifically on the ear and the shoulder. So we only have two really to do. So I'm going to count down three. 1, 2, 3. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Here's going to be where the ear is. I see where that line picked up. It goes out a little bit, and it meets about a quarter way. Let's slide it over. Here's halfway. Here's about a quarter. So that's half. Here's a quarter. And here's the ear. There's a little kind of round wedge here to show the top of the ear, and then kind of a circular thing for the ear hole. And in this next square, it kind of curves down, and I see the outer edge of his neck that meets down here, and we're into that thing over here. Look at that. There's the shadow, or sorry, the shoulder. Here's the shadow of that shoulder right there. All right, so what's crazy is we did the same exact thing. And I'm going to show you, this is when it goes really fast. We just transferred all of those shadow shapes. Remember that, shadow shapes. All right? And the thing is, we're going to go in and start shading this thing up, and you're going to get to see exactly how quick this can occur. Okay, so I'm going to be taking out some special pencils here. These are called Staedtler black pencils, but you can use any type. You could use your standard one, but the reason I'm going to show you is because these get a little bit darker. And we're going to start real quick here. Let me find this last one. 4. Here we go. Okay. So the difference between these pencils, some of them are kind of lighter, some are darker, right? 2B is going to be our lightest one. And I'm going to shade in all of the kind of light shadow areas. So I'm going to pick this to be the lightest gray, which is on his face. Actually, we'll skip that. I'm going to go darkest darks first. So all these shadow areas, I'm picking this dark pencil. Let's start off with that cheek, because that's where we started before. And I'm going to carefully color in and shade this shape. Now remember, we did our work already, so this is just a coloring book. So don't stress out about this. Have some fun with it. Nice thing about working with pencil is it's erasable, so don't freak out. You can always go darker. That's why I like to start off with like one pass. Now, just because I know there's some really dark areas right here, I'm going to make this slightly darker just to help out our drawing a little bit. Notice how light the other pencil lines are appearing now, right? If we start shading in, you can see the shading. All right, some more shadow places. That little wedge of the ear. Now the shadow on the side of his face. Sometimes you got to go back and adjust, but what's interesting here is we notice that this shade goes outside the ear. So you don't even see a line that separates it from the background. That's from when we simplified the drawing from before. Oh, let me turn this back on. Oops. Let's move it over. It's pretty dark out there. I know that this part of the hair is actually nice and dark, so I'm pressing harder to darken that shape. All right, still shading in some of this other stuff to make the light areas pop out. Okay, same thing on the outside, and maybe this face is going to start popping out. So bear with me here. Wow, 55, we're almost going to be right on the button with an hour. Now, if you guys take on this challenge with this photo or another one, I think I found this one on Wikipedia or something. Please, 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 I want to see the results. And if you want to do something fun, definitely post like a before. Like try it once without this technique, and then I want to see you try it with this technique and see if there's a difference. And hopefully if you do this, you'll be making your own coloring books from now on. You won't be like overpaying to buy these like adult coloring books, because the beauty of this is you're making your own art. Okay, here we go. You guys starting to see this now? Okay, I'm going to darken in the eyes a little bit, leaving that little sharp white area to make it look like his eyes are shiny. Darkening in the darkest parts, and then I'll shade in the shadows that we drew in. Okay, might I remind you where we've gone so far today? Like, this is literally insane if you've never done this before, right? Like, if you've ever thought of this, like, oh, how do people draw this? We've literally broken it down. You don't need to know how to draw anything, really. You just need to be able to be like a camera. Is this light or dark, right? And we use the tools available to us to help us with that. Okay, I'm shading in the last of this hair. That's a darker one. Let's lightly shade this one. But if you're still watching, guys, be sure to comment. See if you can, or if anyone's trying this. Again, I really want to see how it turns out. Can you guys see that we created John F. Kennedy? We literally didn't trace on this. We literally used the grid to transfer the details and use our observation powers to do that. Okay? This is when you would go back in and start to maybe lighten up some of those grid lines that you made in the light areas. And you're going to be amazed that, like, if I drew those lines, especially if I drew them lighter, they're going to be pretty easy to lighten up, and you're going to get a realistic result. It's a pretty good bargain. So I'm hoping at the end of this hour, we're just shy of an hour here, you're at least going to come away with a way of looking at people's artwork that's more realistic. I'm going to zoom in here so you can see some of this final work that I'm doing. Okay, and if you apply this technique, literally you can learn to draw anything, and I think it'll teach you how to see things a lot better. Okay, so I'm just going to turn my little screen back on. And again, I'll post the finished version of this. I'll go in with a little bit more detail. You could use what we call like a blending stump to get this thing really smooth. But for our purposes of this drawing, I want you guys to just see, if you make this into a system, it's not always such a mystery. And what artists depend on is you not knowing. Oh, there we go. The artists depend on you guys not knowing the difference between something that was traced or it was transferred. And the thing is it does take work, but the thing is there's a science of applying this knowledge to get the results that you want. You don't have to be freaked out all the time. Odds are there's a process that somebody's following, and they practice over and over to simplify some of the most difficult parts of these things. And I gave you a few tools that you can use, especially those two websites down in the links below. Use those at any time to simplify a picture, even if you end up like just using it as a practice sketch. You know, this is a really great way that, like, in a half hour, you can have a near perfect understanding of how a face comes together. You know, it's not exactly perfect, but that's not the goal of art. It's to bring life to a vision that you have in your head. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this and found some of the information useful. It's definitely like something I use in my studio and a lot of other professionals use, but that's not a reason to ignore it and say, oh, this is too advanced. It's actually, if you were to practice this and dive in, try it 2 or 3 times, you're literally going to come out 10 times more educated on how images work than anyone in the general public. Even people who collect art are probably going to be impressed by your ability to understand how artists are able to transfer, you know, their knowledge into a realistic painting. Okay, so I hope this has been helpful. I really appreciate you guys sticking around for this long. And as usual, I'm really grateful for everyone's support, and I'm hoping to continue on for the remainder of this quarantine. We're already at episode 11, I believe, which is hard to comprehend at this point in my life. But I hope you guys are staying well, healthy, and most importantly, staying creative. So thank you for joining me. This has been Art with Anderson. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to the channel. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of this 2-week quarantine here. That would be awesome, and that'll help us open up a lot more opportunities and tools on YouTube. So I appreciate your time, and I will see you tomorrow at 3:30. This is your daily draw along with Art with Anderson. Thanks so much for joining me, and have a great day.